Hi, Danielle.
Hello.
Good, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm not sure which part of the world are you in right now.
I'm in
Is
Tampa,
it
Florida.
Florida? Okay. So my name is Nicolette. I am the creator for the podcast titled "You're Worthless." Read that again. The juxtaposition of your very soul. First off, thank you very much for saying yes to the interview today. When I read your profile, I could definitely immediately relate to the topic of burnout and juggling few things. I don't have kids of my own, but I can imagine how tough it is to be in organization, Fortune 500, and then with kids, and then and all your own things. So thank you for that. I would like to, as part of my ritual, I'd give an introduction of all my speakers to our listeners today. So, hello everybody. We have Danielle Cobo here today with us. She has over 15 years of corporate experience in the medical tech and biopharmaceutical industry. She knows how to build high-performing teams that increase sales, productivity, and employee retention. Her expertise include corporate resilience and heart-centered leadership. Danielle is the best-selling author of Unstoppable Grit, Break Through the Seven Roadblocks Standing Between You and Achieving Your Goals, and also hosts the globally top-rated podcast, Unstoppable Grit Podcast with Danielle Cobo. So she is a fellow podcaster. I have a lot to learn from her. As a former Fortune 500 senior sales manager, she propelled her team to number one national ranking, even amid the upheaval of downsizing, restructuring, and acquisitions. When her husband, a Black Hawk pilot in the army, was deployed in Iraq for a year, she had to learn to balance a demanding job while keeping up with her two twin boys, who possess more energy than a squirrel after a triple espresso. what a what a wonderful um life there, Danielle. So could you tell us, before we dive straight into the questions, like what was it like growing up as Danielle Cobo?
So I had a very, I would say, beautiful, but also a broken upbringing for my upbringing. I was raised by a single mom who was resilient and she role modeled for me determination, motivation, grit, and tenacity. She was a single mom raising a 5-year old while going to school full time, while working as a server, waitress. And she went from having absolutely nothing to rising the corporate ladder and becoming a senior sales manager for a pharmaceutical company in the 1990s. So, as a female, and being in a leadership role wasn't as common in the 1990s. And she really showed me what possibilities are. And I see that was the beauty of my upbringing is she showed me what was possible and she was a strong, independent role model for me. I also see the brokenness of my upbringing was my mom took me from my father when I was 2.5 years old. So my dad came to pick me up. They had gotten divorced. He came to pick me up, and our house was completely empty, and he didn't know where I was. And I ended up not meeting my father until I was 15 years old. So there's a lot of my upbringing where I felt that I was unworthy of love. I thought that he had chosen another family. The narrative that was fed to me was we got divorced, he had chosen another family. I thought I wasn't good enough as a daughter. I wasn't lovable. I was always fighting for my mom's attention. And so that's where that upbringing of wanting to always seeking validation from others was because of the upbringing that I had.
Mm, 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 mm. That is actually the essence of my podcast. Talk a lot about self-worth and self-esteem issues, and just a bit of a sharing before we go to some of the questions. I started this podcast because of my own trauma, and that was after my divorce back in 2019. And then I threw myself after with me, I a relationship did not work out for me, so I put that aside and threw myself into working, and I had my burnout. So in that hands, that's why I started my podcast. So I can really resonate with that, Danielle. So, um, can you share with us how has your life experience helped you actually develop that grit and tenacity?
I believe that my grit and tenacity was a combination of it being innate within me, but it was nurtured and it was role modeled for me. So my mom role modeled it. She showed me when when you set a goal and you work towards your goal and you put action in place towards your goal, you can accomplish it. So she role modeled grit for me. She really showed me what possibilities are out there. Then I would say it was innate within me because it's just a characteristic that I have deep inside of me of just being very driven and motivated. But also, a lot of the challenges that I experienced in my life shaped me into who I am today. And I believe that the challenges that we experience in our life, whether it's going through a divorce, whether it's going through being taken from a family member, or losing a loved one, or losing your job, all of these challenges that we go through in life, we can either have a choice to fall victim of our circumstances or to look at these circumstances and say, okay, this is a challenging situation. What can I learn and how can I grow and how can I be a better person than the person I am today? How can I show up to be a better person tomorrow? And take what these challenges are that I'm facing right now and how can they shape me into the person that I want to be tomorrow. And so that's why I say it's a combination between the three of really how I developed this grit throughout my life. There's been so many challenges that I've faced throughout my life, whether it's been taking from my father, whether it's been battling postpartum depression after the birth of my twin boys, to uh, a series of events that took place in 2020 where I had lost my mom. My husband had just returned home from a deployment. I was in a very toxic work environment where I ended up leaving a company after 7 years, and my identity was tied to my job title, my paycheck, and I tied
Yeah,
who I was to everything, the accomplishments that I had. And what
that's
I've
right.
learned through the all of these experiences is everything's meant to happen the way that it's meant to happen. And it's because of the challenges that we go through that we become a stronger person if we're willing to put the work in.
Hmm. I think that's the keyword right there. We're willing to put the work in. Because um I don't know, Danielle, what about you? But for me, like I also had some series of events all through my life. Like my parents were I come from I'm very blessed, come from a loving family. So all throughout my marriage, although they were opposing of it during the start, and then until I got divorced, my dad was like, "Okay, I told you so." But they still accepted me back as their daughter, so I'm very grateful. But it's like it's sort of like switch or change my narrative to being resilient means you can't step into your femininity. Like I don't know, people view me as that. It's like I'm intimidating, so I carry myself in a different way. And it's I wouldn't say it's like I think I've known now not to settle, but I can't help there are people who actually like not I ask my friends like also my sister said, what do you see in me? It's like, you exude very there's this energy of sometimes you come off very strong, quite strong. So I don't know, what is your take on that?
On coming across strong,
Yeah.
I think there's a difference between coming off strong and coming off confident.
Mm,
Sometimes people come across strong because they're guarded and they don't want to be vulnerable and let people in. And then there's other times where people come across as confident and assertive and knowing what they want. But I believe it's important that you know the difference between the two. I know that sometimes earlier in my life, before I really learned the power of vulnerability, I was very guarded in my life. I was so scared of being hurt again by I'd been hurt by my mom with the lies that she had told me, and I'd been hurt by my dad by thinking that he had abandoned me. So for many years of my life, I was very guarded and
right.
came across as being, I guess you could say, strong in this sense, but strong but lacking connection with people. It was hard for people to get to know me. And it was because I wasn't willing to be vulnerable, because that was my defense mechanism of protecting myself from getting hurt again. And when I finally released this guard that I had and started to show up vulnerably and talk about, there's been times where I've battled postpartum depression after the birth of my twins, and just the heartache that it was getting through that, and going through 16 weeks of cognitive behavioral therapy, and working towards journaling, and doing everything that I possibly could to get through that time period so that I could show up as the best mom that I wanted to be. Or the challenges that I've faced of feeling like I was an imposter in starting a business, that I was the insecurities that I had of comparing myself to others, or the insecurities of the worth that I was tying to a job title and awards and the accolades that I had. When I started to show up and start talking about, hey, here's the challenges that I've overcame. And there's a difference between showing up and talking up your challenges and saying, woe is me, or you can say it in a very inspiring way, like, hey, these are the challenges that I went through. I've experienced imposter syndrome. I've experienced perfectionism. I've been guarded in my life. I've been scared to let people to get to know me because I didn't want to get hurt. And this is where it's hurt me in my life. Here's maybe where some areas it's helped me in my life, but here's where it's really hurt me in my life. And here's the lessons that I learned from it. And this is how it's helped once I've moved past it and I've learned to overcome perfectionism and imposter syndrome and release my guard and really be vulnerable. I've learned that I've been able to connect with people on a deeper level. I have my book, Unstoppable Grit, and it's Break Through the 7 Roadblocks Standing Between You and Achieving Your Goals. And it's so interesting that when I was a manager for a Fortune 500 organization, and they did a 360 performance review, which is basically they interview everybody on my team, they interview everybody that I worked with on a peer level, and then they interviewed the people that I reported to. So they interviewed 23 people, and they had them fill out like a 40-question assessment on me and my leadership skills.
Wow.
Yes. Yes. Talk about
how rigorous. I mean, I am so intrigued to know what is this? Which one is this?
So
which company is this? Like, I know, but we can't disclose it.
A lot of companies will do it. It's called a 360 performance review, and it helps leaders understand what other people's perceptions are there of them. And as we know, the higher level of self-awareness we have, the better that we can improve as individuals. And it was really hard because one of the feedbacks that came back was, okay, yes, she's a very driven, she's a great manager in these areas, but one of the feedbacks that came back was she is guarded and not vulnerable and not authentic. And inauthentic.
But for you to be able to say this to me right now means you've broken through that barrier.
I've done the work. And it's interesting now, full circle, that the number one thing that people say to me when they're reading my book is, we appreciate how vulnerable you are in the book. That vulnerability is something you don't see very often. So I've learned that vulnerability is the key to connection, is the key to showing up and being somebody that people want to be around, because you're authentic. Vulnerability is authenticity. And so I really had to do the work towards it. It wasn't something that came easy to me. I had to release the guard. But it's been so powerful, because when people tell me we really appreciate the vulnerability in my book, I'm like, okay, good. Because it was really scary writing it. There's some stories in there that my husband didn't even know. I've been married to my husband 11 years, and there's stories in there that my husband had not heard of. There's stories in there, my best friend of 20 years, she's like, I had no idea that you had gone through some of these things. And now she says, I just have a different level of appreciation for who you are and what you've gone through, and why you are so inspired to do the work that you do.
Wow. I just got the chills. You're such a wonderful human being, Danielle.
Thank you.
What an inspiration. Yeah. So let's go back to the topic of burnout. So, what are the signs of burnout?
Signs of burnout.
And yes, signs of burnout, and people should start looking out for it. Like you can be in in that rat race and just don't know, you just get sucked into it day to
Mhm.
day. Yeah, until you drop dead. We hope not.
Well, there's the physical signs of burnout and there's the emotional signs of burnout. So
Mm.
I go through let's talk about the physical signs of burnout. We know that when you are experiencing burnout, that our body will physically communicate to us when we're stressed, when we're overwhelmed, when we're burnt out. But a lot of times we just move past those signs. So in my book, one of the exercises that I talk about, the flow of my book, Unstoppable Grit, is it shares a story, it shares a learning lesson, and then it shares practical advice on how you can apply the learning lessons to your own life. I want people walking away from reading this book going, I have tangible advice that I could apply to my life to transform my life. That is the flow of the book. And one of the exercises in the book is called the weekly body scan. And so you stand in front of a mirror and you look in the mirror, and there's many times throughout my life where my body has shown me the signs of burnout, but I just ignored them. So you stand in front of the mirror and you look at your hair. Is your hair lifeless? Is it dull? Is it shedding? Like, are you losing more hair? I know that when people are experiencing a lot of stress, a lot of times we'll start to shed more hair than we normally do. Then you go down to your face. Is your face, if your face is dull, it could be that you're not hydrating your body enough. And 2% dehydration, just 2% dehydration affects our mental fatigue and our mental clarity. So if your skin is not that glowy, dewy skin that it's supposed to be, it could be a lack of dehydration. We always look at Jennifer
Mm.
Aniston. I'm like, why does she always look so beautiful? Why does her skin just always?
Divine.
Yeah. Well, she drinks a gallon of water per day. A gallon of water per
Wow.
day. Our brains are made up of 80% water. And so if we're not drinking enough water, we're not hydrating enough, then we're going to be experiencing mental fatigue. That is going to be causing burnout. Because then
Mm.
we're trying even harder to focus when we're already dehydrated and experiencing mental fatigue. So I say, go to your face. Then you look at, do you have any acne breakouts? That could be a sign of either hormones or it could be a sign of stress. Then go down to your neck and your shoulders. Are you experiencing an increase in headaches or migraines? Are your shoulders raised or are they
Stiff.
relaxed?
Yeah.
Yeah, my husband, he
Yeah.
knows I'm really stressed. When I'm really stressed, I raise my shoulders and my husband will come up behind me and he'll take his hands and he'll push my shoulders down. And I'm like, ooh, okay. I'm stressed,
That's stiff.
clearly.
Yeah.
So those are the signs. When I was in medical sales, I would break out every third quarter in hives on my chest because I was so stressed. Yes, trying
No.
to hit my quota. It was always the hardest quarter was during the summer months. So that is a sign of stress and burnout. Then go to your stomach. Are you having a hard time digesting your food? Is there always anxiousness in your stomach? Like all of these are the physical signs of burnout. Now, these are the physical signs. A lot of times this is a prolonged stress and overwhelm that is creating the physical signs. But if we're able to identify the emotional signs early, we can prevent the physical signs. So there's 7 signs of emotional burnout that I talk about in the book. But let's just take one of them, complaining. Do you get in a cycle of despair? When we start complaining about other people, complaining about our lives, we begin to focus on what's not working in our life versus focusing on being grateful for what is working in our life. And that is a sign of burnout. And burnout, I believe, is a result of having a lack of passion and purpose in what we're doing. It is not tied to how much we're working. Because I can tell you right now, as an entrepreneur, I've probably worked more hours than I did before, but I don't feel burnt out because I'm passionate about what I do. I have a purpose in what I'm doing. Versus if
Yeah.
you could be working 25 hours a week and feel burned out if you are lacking the passion and the purpose in what you're doing. You can work 60 hours a week and not feel burnt out because you're so passionate about what you're doing. It feels like a passion project more than it does feel like a job or work. So I think it's
Yeah.
important for us to understand what causes burnout, what are the emotional signs of burnout, and what are the physical signs of burnout.
Mm. So So for you, how long did you experience your burnout until you took the step to leave that your environment?
Well, for me, the time that I experienced the most burnout was after the birth of my twins. So
Ah,
for us, right before my twins were born, we had a flood in our house. So we were already in a situation where their bathroom, their nurseries were flooded. A toilet had overflowed and flooded into both of their bathrooms. So we were in construction. Then we were supposed to be done by the time that they were born, but they were born 6 weeks early. Then when they
oh,
so they're born 6 weeks early. Oh, it gets worse. Okay,
oh,
they're born
really?
they're born 6 weeks early. They spend 17 days in the NICU, the
Okay.
neonatal intensive care unit, and they were hooked up to feeding tubes. They were hooked up to oxygen. They didn't have the lung capacity to breathe on. They would forget to breathe is what would happen. They weren't able to feed themselves and they would forget to breathe. So the alarms would go off. We'd have to unwrap them, tickle their feet and get them to like wake up and breathe again. And they would need to go 3 days of breathing on their own and not desaturating in order for them to go home on their own. So that was the stress of them being born 6 weeks early, the stress of the NICU and in that experience of thinking you're going to go home with your babies. Then as soon as they get home, it takes an hour and a half to feed one, an hour and a half to feed the other. Then I'd
Another
have an
one.
hour break. And I would do this round the clock every 3 hours as they needed to eat because they were 4 pounds, 10 ounces and 5 pounds, 3 ounces. They didn't have the stomach capacity to hold food for a long period of time. So they needed to eat on the dot every 3 hours. And because they were premature, they needed to be on premature, like slow flow bottles. So it would take them a long time to eat. Well, I was getting these two little ones were completely exhausting my husband and I, who had gone back to work the day they left the NICU. My in-laws they're living with us because they're moving out to where we live. They're living with us. And these two little kids had worn out four adults. Like to do the nighttime feedings, to do the daytime feedings, we were all exhausted to the point where I wasn't taking care of myself. I was so exhausted that I wasn't eating. And when I would eat, I would get so depressed and anxious over the nighttime feedings and not getting enough sleep that I would eat my food and I would just throw it up right away because I just was so stressed and overwhelmed with what was taking place. And I remember one day I was walking through the hallway and I get this excruciating sharp pain in my stomach. And I get rushed to the hospital and come to find out the doctor, when he comes in to tell me, he says that I had gallstones. I need to have my gallbladder removed. This is 2 weeks after they get home from the NICU. So then
Oh my gosh.
as I'm laying in the hospital bed, this is all a result of this is all a result of understanding that if you want to perform the best version of yourself, you've got to take care of yourself with healthy nutrition. You've got to hydrate yourself, like just the foundations of self-care. And you got to and eat and sleep. Sleep is important. That whole philosophy of sleep till you're dead, I think that needs to be thrown out the window. Absolutely not. You need 8 hours of sleep to function and have the mental clarity the next day. So this was all a result of not taking good care of myself, just a result of having premature twins. And as I'm laying in the bed and the doctor's telling me I need to have emergency surgery, I look up at the TV and it says breaking news, category 5 hurricane headed to Tampa. Then I get a call from my husband, who's a Black Hawk
I'm
pilot in the
so
Army.
sorry.
Yeah, he gets a
Wow.
call and he says, I've just been activated for the military. I need to move the helicopters to the Northeast. So I look at the doctor and I say, I can't have surgery. I passed the gallstones. I can't have surgery today. I need to go home. I need to board up my house and go get a generator and prepare for this hurricane. So all of this happened within, them being the
A
construction and
month.
the house month. So all of that, the combined, it full-fledged me into postpartum depression. And I was having panic attacks. I would cry every single day sitting at the table. There's such a misconception about postpartum depression. And there's such this misconception that, I am a strong, confident, independent, very driven woman. But I can tell you right now that I was a completely different person at that particular point. Whatever chemically had happened within me and all that stress of all of those events, I sat at the dinner table and cried every single night at 5 o'clock. So stressed about the nighttime feedings. I was down. I had lost so much weight that I was thinner at 2 months after having my kids. I was thinner then than I was before having my kids. And so I share this story because I think it's so important. Number one is that sometimes we go through things in life and we may experience depression, and it's not a reflection of who we are. It could just be a very difficult time that we're going through. And so to seek help and to not have that stigma of depression being such a negative thing, it just could be a particular period of rough time that we're going through in our life. I ended up doing 16 weeks of cognitive behavioral therapy. I was practicing gratitude. I was going for walks every day. I was doing everything that I possibly could to get myself in the right state of mind. And a lot of the practices that I learned during that time, I still implement today as a preventative way so that I don't spiral back into that particular situation, because life is always going to have challenges. You're going to lose loved ones. You may go through a divorce. You may go through a bad breakup. You may go through a job loss. So like really ensuring that you're taking care of yourself. And I always say, take care of yourself first, then your family, because you can't take care of your family unless you're in a good emotional, physical, mental wellness state. And then take care of your family, and then take care of your business.
Mm, thank you. That was the whole circle. Thank you, Danielle. Wow. I only read about postpartum depression from the media, but to hear it from a person who's actually lived through it, I wouldn't wish that on anybody.
No, I remember
Yeah.
looking at my husband one day and I looked at him, and this is the moment I knew I had postpartum. Granted, I minored in psychology in college, so I knew the signs. And I remember looking at my husband and I say, I don't want to take my life. I want my life taken from me. All I want to do is fall
Oh my
asleep
God.
and not wake up. I was so overwhelmed and stressed. And that's when I looked at him and I said, I need help.
That help. Yeah.
And it's so important. It is okay to ask for help, because now, I did the work. I put the work in. I got the help. And now a year after all of this took place, a year after that, my husband deployed to Iraq for a year. I was still leading a team for a Fortune 500 organization, traveling 60% of the year. And I was the primary caregiver for my 1.5-year-old twins. And it was
Oh,
because
wow.
of what I learned, because I asked for help, the techniques and the strategies and the tips that I learned going through those 16 weeks of cognitive behavioral therapy, and just my own experience of recovering from that helped prepare me for that time period when he was deployed. And I'm like, if I have gone through postpartum, I can go through this deployment. This is
Yeah.
temporary.
Wow. Danielle, that was so moving. Wow. Okay. When it comes to adapting to change, what steps should a person take?
So there's the 5 stages of grief that one of the psychologists, and I'm blanking on her name right now, I have also been up late last night because my kid is sick, sitting on the couch sick right now.
Oh, I'm so
So,
okay. I'm
well, you
so
know what?
sorry.
That's the thing. When they're born premature, they get sick all the time. So, I'm blanking on the psychologist's name, but she studied people that were going through grief, and there's the 5 stages of grief. And I believe that you can take these 5 stages, and you can also apply them to the 5 stages of change, adapting to change. So anytime that change occurs, let's say you go through a job loss, the first step is denial. Or actually, I'm going to use the example of when my husband first told me that he was going to deploy for a year. I was in denial. Like, there's no way that he's going to deploy for a year. I'm going to have to quit my job. I was in denial of that this was actually going to take place. It's something that we talked about. In the military, there's a possibility of them deploying. Not everyone deploys, but there's a high possibility that they might deploy. And you talk about it, but it doesn't really sink in until it actually happens.
Until it
And
happens. Yeah.
yep. And so the first step is denial. And then the second step is anger. I was angry at him for joining the military. I was angry at the military for deploying him. Like, why him? Then you go into the third stage, which is bargaining. And that's the what ifs. Well, what if he doesn't come home? What if he doesn't deploy? Maybe there's a change of heart. Maybe they're going to take somebody else. Then you go through the depression state, like this, am I going to be able to do it? And the sadness of learning that he is going to be gone for a year. And then finally you get to acceptance. And so anytime that you're going through a change in your life, a lot of times we'll go through these 5 steps. They're not always in order. We may go through one faster than the other, but anytime that you are experiencing any change in your life, know that the 5 steps are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and eventually acceptance. The whole goal is that we get to acceptance as quickly as possible, because acceptance is where we've accepted that there are certain things that are out of our control. There are certain things that are in our control. Let's focus in on what's in our control so that we can make a plan to move forward and not get stuck in the circumstances that are out of our control.
Right. So basically, anybody is faced with change, just go through that 5 stages. Perfect. Okay, so Danielle, what is next for you?
Oh, what is next for me? So
Mhm.
right now, my book just came out. So right now it's hit
Congratulations.
bestsellers. Thank you. It's hit bestseller in work-life balance in business, career guide, job hunting, women in business. So
I need to read that.
right now it's a big focus on the book.
Wow.
And the reason why I'm putting such a big focus on the book is because my hope is that the readers find themselves in the pages of the book, and that they read the stories, and they may not be able to relate specifically to that postpartum story, but maybe they can relate to a story or a time where they've felt depressed, or maybe they've gone through any hardship in their life. I talk about several different things in there. So my hope is that the readers find themselves in the pages and they walk away with practical strategies that are going to help improve their life. I want transformation. I want to be able to make a positive impact in the people's lives and know that we are more capable than we think that we are. And instead of comparing ourselves to others and thinking of like, well, other people are more successful, or they're prettier, or they're this or they're that, more than of what we think that we are, let's start taking some of these stories and going, if this person's gone through it, I can go through it too. There is no difference of me than any other person. It's just that, are we willing to put the steps in place to move forward? Are we willing to do the work? Are we willing to ask for help? And so that's a big focus right now. I'm also hosting my podcast, Unstoppable Grit, where we share stories of people who have overcome adversity and they've had grit and they've thrived, and they really talking about the mindset shifts that are available so that we can really thrive in all areas of our life. And I'm doing a lot of speaking engagements. So that's kind of where the future of where I am now.
Oh, what? I love that for you, Danielle. Wow. When I see you, it's like, I mean, being a third party, even if when you were telling me the story, I could picture that as like a ticker tape, and I'm watching it, and now to hear you speak about what's next for you and what's currently happening, the transformation is amazing. So, okay, all right, I'm gonna pivot to a self-worth question because my podcast talks about that. So, question for you, Danielle. In your opinion, how do childhood experiences and upbringing impact an individual's sense of self-worth and their ability to engage in self-discovery later in life?
I believe that our most formidable years are between the ages of 0 and 8. That is
Mm,
where that is where our viewpoints are shaped, and how we're
yeah,
treated during those years
yeah.
shapes how we believe about ourselves in those years. So you think about, there's a gentleman that I know that he takes his daughter out ever so often throughout the year. He takes her out, they get all dressed up and they go to dinner, and he opens the door for her, and he brings her a flower and takes her to dinner. And think about what that's teaching her about worthiness, on how she should be treated by a man. And I do the same thing with my boys in a different capacity. We go and they go in my closet and they're able to pick out whatever ball gown that they want out of my closet. And we go on date nights. And
Wow.
we go on date nights and they get to pick the location, and I'm showing them like the quality time of spending with each other, and how important it is to have that quality time together. And I even give them the card and they pay.
How old are your boys?
They're
How old are
6.
your
They're
kids?
6. Yeah. I mean, they're young.
Cute.
But they even learn,
Wow.
we go through a drive-through, we go to a restaurant, they order their own food because it's teaching them the skill sets of speaking up for what they want. And as simple as it is of them ordering their own food at a fast food restaurant, but it's them learning to look at somebody in their eyes and say, I'd like to order this, and to speak up. And those skill sets that we learn early on in
Express
life.
their truth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so important. And that's why I say the most formidable years are the with first years of our lives. And so, as I've shared, because my dad wasn't in my life, for many years, I thought that I was unworthy of unconditional love. I thought that I wasn't worthy of all that. Now I have a great relationship with my dad now, and I've done a lot of the work where I do know that I am worthy of unconditional love. I know what unconditional love is now that I've become a parent. And I know that, you love your kids no matter what. That's unconditional love. They're going to make mistakes. There's going to be times where you're going to want to pull your hair out because they're not listening and they're running around the house and they're, not listening to the following directions. But yeah, it's important that if we really want to understand how we are as an individual, why we do the things that we do, that we reflect back and look at our upbringing, both the positive and the negative, and have the self-awareness, the self-reflection, to have the self-awareness to see how our upbringing has shaped us into the person that we are today, and maybe some areas in our life that we get to work on.
Yeah. And anyway, we're always healing until we're actually 6 feet on the ground, because we can't stop healing.
Mm-hmm.
So what is your heart's greatest wish?
My heart's greatest wish, that my kids see in themselves what I see in them, which is just endless possibilities. They're at an age right now where
Oh,
they
that was so beautiful. Oh,
right now the future is that there's so much in their future that's undefined. It's not as though I'm like me, 40 years old, this is what I've done, this is kind of like the path that I'm going to go down. They have endless opportunities right now. And we all do, but nothing's been shaped or defined. So it's so fun to ask them, instead
they're
of like,
blank canvas.
yeah, instead of what do you want to do when you grow up, it's who do you get to be when you grow up? How do you want to show up in this world? What kind of impact do you want to make? What kind of difference do you want to make? What excites you? What are you passionate about? There's so much more open in what they're at right now. And I just want them to see, if you're interested in something, okay, let's explore it. Let's try it.
Let's try it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you've done the work, Danielle.
I hope so. And I'm still a work in progress. I still suffer from comparison. I still suffer from perfectionism. I still suffer from imposter syndrome. The only difference is I'm able to recognize the signs early on and put into action and make the changes.
Last question for you.
Mm-hmm.
If you could create a quote right now for you to leave to the audience listening and the world as your legacy, what would it be?
When you believe in yourself, others will believe in you too.
It starts with you.
It starts with you.
Thank you so much, Danielle, for the time, and apologize again for today. But this 40 minutes is just reaffirms of whatever it is that I've gone through, and not just you and I, but all the other people that we are impacting through your work, through my work, and I think you're just that beacon of light.
Thank you.
And please continue to to do that. And I will be checking out your book, Audible.
The Audible comes out soon. Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So, all
Yeah.
right, that's fine. I will get a copy of that. Thank you so much, Danielle, for your time. If there's any other opportunity, I'd like to ask you to come on for the next episode. Perhaps we could talk about other things.
Yeah. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. And
Thank you.
once this airs, I
Hmm.
will tag you and you
Okay.
can share it on your social media.
Okay.